Welcome everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar, My Story, Our Journey. We're going to have a really interesting session, we hope, and here is our program. So we're going to be speaking to and celebrating the survivors teaching students in Australia, which ANZGOG is very happy to be running. I'd first like to introduce you to Karen Livingstone, who on behalf of our CEO, Alison Evans, is going to welcome you all. Thank you, Karen.
Hi, everybody. ANZGOG acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land throughout Australia, and we pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Hello, my name is Karen Livingstone. 20 years ago, I became an ovarian cancer advocate following my mother's diagnosis with this disease. I joined the Australian New Zealand Gynaecological Oncology Group, more fondly known as ANZGOG, in 2008. Firstly as a board member, and now to my current role as Head of Fundraising and Development for Women Can. On behalf of all the ANZGOG members and management team, we would like to welcome you to My Story, Our Journey, Survivors Teaching Students Online Forum today. It is ANZGOG's 20th year of operation. ANZGOG was founded in 2000 by Professor Michael Friedlander, Michael Quinn and Danny Rishin to give Australian women diagnosed with a gynaecological cancer the benefit of participating in international clinical trials. Reflecting over the last 20 years to the over 3,000 women who have been involved in one of the 45 ANZGOG clinical trials. ANZGOG's mandate is to improve life for women through cancer research. Majority of our over 1,000 members are working in the sector and include gynaecological, medical, radiation oncologists, nurse specialists, exercise physiologists, psychologists, data managers and laboratory researchers, plus more. Clinical trials are used to determine whether new drugs, diagnostics or treatments are both safe and effective. Improving survival for women through new research discoveries can only come through clinical trials. ANZGOG undertakes trials to target new treatments to improve quality of life, to improve clinical practice with the aim of improving overall survival for women diagnosed with gynaecological cancer. Women are always at the centre of everything we do at ANZGOG, and it is for this reason that ANZGOG piloted in 2017 the Survivors Teaching Students program in Australia. We are grateful for the initial funding received from Cancer Australia, a grant which ends on June 30th this year. We acknowledge the ongoing financial support of the Team Teal campaign and its patron, Duncan McPherson, OAM. To ensure the program can further expand, we are actively seeking further opportunities through philanthropy and new sponsors. There are so few ways of generating prevention for ovarian cancer. As the only preventative program in Australia that educates medical students through a woman's lived experience, Survivors Teaching Students is vital in giving the women the chance to be diagnosed early and in turn giving them the chance to live their best life. We hope that you will enjoy this forum. Welcome to My Story, Our Journey, and I'll pass you back to our STS National Program Manager, Helen Gooden. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you very much, Karen, for introducing and welcoming everybody to our program this evening. So just bear with me one moment while I bring our screen back up again. So I'd like to talk to you now a little bit, beg your pardon. Right, just one moment. We're having some technical issues here, but we'll be right in a moment. So I'm going to talk to you about Survivors Teaching Students, our 2020 vision, now and into the future. So Survivors Teaching Students is a program that is an international program, and volunteers from around the world have been telling their stories to more than 15,000 students a year since 2002, where it started in the US. The program's now running in Canada, UK and Australia. And all of our volunteers tell their stories to help make a difference for the future. In 2017, ANZGOG piloted the program in Sydney. It was very well received, and shortly afterwards we expanded to start running programs in Newcastle, in Armidale, Dubbo, Geelong, Fremantle, Perth, Adelaide, Brisbane, Gold Coast and Townsville. We've now delivered the Survivors Teaching Students presentations to more than 2,000 students. We've had initial co-funding from Cancer Australia through the Supporting People with Cancer Grant Initiative, and we've been very grateful for that support to establish the program, which we will now continue. So our project aims, when we started the project, were modest. As you see in the middle, we aimed to establish over 3 years the program in 4 states. We aimed to recruit and train 60 volunteers and to deliver at least 15 sessions and reach 400 medical students. The uptake of the program and the demand for the program and from medical, nursing and allied health schools around Australia has been phenomenal, and so has the interest from our survivors and caregivers to share their stories. As you can see, we're now established in 5 states. We've got double the number of volunteers active in the program. We've reached more than 5 times our original goal, and we've delivered 4 times the number of sessions with 60 sessions. My volunteers tell me that whilst they started in the program to want to make a difference for other women and families to follow, they actually find that working in the program has been healing for them. And as one of our young women working in the program said, telling your story can be very powerful, scary and emotional, but also amazingly empowering and healing. You can see here the number of universities right across Australia that we're working to. We're now running 13 programs in universities across Australia, with interest coming all the time from new medical schools. You can see here what a fabulous community of women and caregivers that we've got across Australia. I'd now like to introduce Bronwyn Grout. Bronwyn, if you'd like to turn your camera on and your mic.
I'm not sure that she's joined us yet, Helen.
Right, okay. Well, we'll just wait a little moment, or we'll just keep going. And when Bronwyn comes in, I'll ask her to speak then. But Bronwyn first brought the program to Australia. She had been part of the program in the US and saw herself the importance and the power of this program in making a difference for women and caregivers, but importantly for medical students. Given that it had been running for so long in the United States, it was quite apparent how powerful the program was. And it was not unusual for doctors to come up to caregivers and survivors who are presenting and saying that it was because I heard you sharing your story when I was a med student that it encouraged me to follow gynaecological oncology as a specialty in the future, as it really touched a chord with me and I wanted to make a difference. So Bronwyn, welcome, and thank you very much for joining us and to tell a little bit about your story and to introduce a video that we've made about survivors teaching students. We just need you to unmute.
Sorry.
You're right, go ahead.
Hi everyone. Just to introduce myself a little bit, I had first-line treatment for stage 3 ovarian cancer back in 2007. Once I recuperated and felt emotionally ready, I started looking for ways to make sense of my experience and make best use of my second chance, since it's a bad diagnosis to get and I had amazing first-line treatment. In late 2010, I found the Survivors Teaching Students program while I was working in the US and began participating soon after that in New Jersey and New York State. I found it amazingly cathartic and empowering, even though it was scary, and I saw firsthand the fantastic impact presenting our stories had on the students. In 2013, I learned that I would be returning to Australia, and I began looking for a similar program in Australia. And I really couldn't find anything even remotely close. So I contacted the US STS program director at the Ovarian Cancer National Alliance, and I began discussing with them how we could bring the program back home with me to Australia. I felt a real passion for the program, and I wanted the women in Australia impacted by ovarian cancer to have the same voice I had in the US. And I wanted the Australian medical students to also hear the same message as the US students had been receiving, to evoke some positive change in the experience of Australian women diagnosed with this disease in the future. So once I got back to Australia in 2014, I knocked on many doors to try find a home for the STS program. Amazingly, in parallel, Kristen Larson and Rose Malloy had also heard of the STS program, and around the same time had also started discussing ways to bring the program to Australia. And in 2016, we found the perfect home with ANZGOG. With the Cancer Australia grant and the amazing support of ANZGOG, the STS program in Australia was launched in 2017. Kristen Larson, Kristen Young and I presented at the very first Australian STS session in August 2017, and the rest, as they say, is history. I'm beyond proud of how successful it has been and just how many students we have reached with STS in Australia in such a short time. It's truly humbling and a testament to the wonderful community we have in Australia, and it's amazing to see your dreams realised. We'd like to now play a video for you about the program prepared by Alison.
Every day, 4 women are diagnosed, but sadly, every day 3 women pass away from ovarian cancer. It's only a 46% survival rate beyond 5 years, and that hasn't changed for about 30 years. I feel that if I can have my voice contributing to bring change and bring hope, and also change that statistic in the future, that means so much. So it's a group of either 3 or 4 women presenting, or carers, and there is a facilitator. And so we go to universities, to nursing schools, and also to hospitals, and talk with medical students, nursing students, about our journey through ovarian cancer. Obviously, carers are heavily involved in the treatment of the women with ovarian cancer. So with the doctors and the people and the consultants who are talking to us, it's really important to understand the role of the carer, understanding that you're not just talking to the patient, that you're talking to a family. And also to understand that patients have their own difficulties dealing with the medical system, and that how they relate to their doctor and how effective their doctor is at listening can go a long way to simplify or to smooth all that complexity in the health system. Because there's actually pretty good hard data that health systems are more efficient and cost-effective when doctors communicate well. To know that we are more than just a diagnosis, we're a complete person who has a family and who has, I guess, a life to live. And so to enable them to be able to diagnose better and also deliver the care in a more holistic way.
It's a tricky disease to pick up, but we want to improve where we are at the moment.
Yeah, so it's really important for doctors and the health carers to understand the signs and symptoms, because if ovarian cancer is picked up in the earlier stages, it's a lot easier to treat, and the outcomes, the survival rates will be a lot better. But also to listen to the ladies, they've got a lot to say. It's their experience, it's their body, and to believe. And not to question, but to understand where they're coming from.
If you're interested, curious, and you listen, and you think about it from how the patient might be going to hear it, then you're going to go a long way to helping with this. I would love to encourage women and their carers to get involved with Survivors Teaching Students. It's a wonderful program where you share your story and you feel that you're really helping to make a difference. So it gives me a personal sense of competence and relevance, a lot of which can be undermined when you lose your capacity through having gone through cancer.
It's a real additional purpose to life that I feel that I can help save other women's lives, help the quality of their life, that journey can be made with a much better prospect for women in the future.
To be able to share the story does give a bit more clarity. Some of the stories are not great, some of the stories are quite sad, but the stories are the stories, and we're made up of stories, and they're all extremely important.
We're just going to move on now, and I'm going to introduce our panel. I'm very thrilled to have Dr. Paul Cohen, Dr. Ashley Foster, Mark and Shiva, our Monash medical students, joining us today. So if you would all please turn your cameras on and we'll start our panel session. So thank you very much. Just wait for Paul to turn his on as well. So this is our first webinar via Zoom, and coronavirus has forced us all into new ways of working and new ways of thinking. And our plan was to have this webinar as a live forum in Melbourne earlier in the year, as in conjunction with our annual scientific meeting. Zoom has enabled us to be able to hold it now, albeit with some technical difficulties, but I'm very thrilled to have you all here with us today, and thank you so much for joining us. We called our webinar My Story, Our Journey, because I really wanted to bring forward how the stories of our volunteers, of our women and caregivers, really become part of the journey of you as medical students, Mark and Shiva, and all of the other students that benefit from taking part in the program. So I just wanted to ask you, perhaps Shiva and Mark first, if you could just share some of your insights as being part of the program.
Hi everyone. I might go first, Mark, if that's okay. So my name is Shiva and I'm a final year medical student at Monash University, and it's a great privilege to be here as part of the forum, so thank you, Helen, for having us. And I'm also very fortunate to have had the experience to be able to listen to some of the stories of these amazing and brave women and carers. For me, the STS program was quite a unique learning experience and very different to what I'd otherwise had in terms of standard medical education. And today I'd like to share 3 sort of pertinent and influential learning points that I took away from the program. And the first one that I wanted to speak about was insight. I think as a student, when you're on placement and I'm looking at all the people who are coming through the hospital doors, for me, I see such a great diversity in experience. I'm seeing different socioeconomic demographics, ethnic origins, different ages. And as with anyone, it's easier to always relate to someone who's similar to yourself, which I find, but I'm also aware that not every patient that I treat or that I'm involved with will be someone that I can relate to. And that was the sort of first point that I think really jumped out to me being part of this program, because there was such a diversity of experience among all the different women who had come to speak to us. And they were from all different walks of life, speaking about the way in which maybe even the same cancer had impacted their activities and their relationships and their families. And it was instrumental in enabling me to better understand each of the patients I then went on to meet during my women's health rotation. The next point that I wanted to speak about was about knowledge. And I think having spent the last couple of years as a final year student, more in the hospital as opposed to being in university, I think I've learned that sometimes what's taught, the way that medicine is sometimes taught and examined is actually quite different from what practically happens in the hospital. And for example, I think in many exam questions that I've had, the patient who comes in with a heart attack is saying, I've got central crushing chest pain radiating down my arm, up my left jaw. And to be honest, I've never heard a patient say that. And in fact, the people that have come in have said things like, I feel like I've got a bit of heartburn and I feel like I'm nauseous or I want to throw up. And listening to the survivors talking about their experience with their illness and these women describing the signs and symptoms that they noticed in their own words, without all of the medical jargon, I think is invaluable information and knowledge that is particularly important for future medical professionals who might then be the first person that some of these women might see later on. And lastly, I wanted to touch on the illness experience. I think it's very hard from a textbook to understand the experience of an illness from a patient or a woman's perspective, especially if the only time that you get to spend with them is a 15-minute clinic appointment. And I think with the STS program, first of all, it was extremely moving and inspirational to listen to women who dealt with this and conquered this disease on a daily basis, but also because when they were speaking to us, they also spoke about so much more about themselves and didn't let this define them. They talked about their hobbies and their families and what they like to do in their spare time. And I think it reinforced the idea that our patients are so much more than the half a page of notes that we might have about their medical history or treatments. In closing, I just want to take a moment to thank all of the women who've been extremely courageous and taken time out of their lives to purely help educate us and improve the care that women in future will receive. I think the STS program is extremely powerful, and I think all my colleagues would agree in that the experience has definitely changed our perspective in terms of gynecological cancers and will definitely positively influence the way in which we provide care and hope to empower women in future. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Shiva. And Mark, I'll come back to you, but I just wanted to bring you in, Ashley, if you wouldn't mind. And if you could comment on what Shiva was just talking about, and is this what you've seen with your own students as well?
Yeah, look, that's a pretty consistent message that I've seen in my students as well. So for those who don't know me, I'm Ashley Forster. I'm a medical doctor by background, but I work at the University of Queensland in the Faculty of Medicine, and I teach primarily first and second year students. And one of the modules that I coordinate is in men's and women's health. So that's how I came to know Helen and our area coordinator, Jeanette, and Kristen Larson, who Bronwyn mentioned earlier, were the first three people that I met in this program. And we've had 2 iterations of STS programs now, and very similar experiences to what Shiva's described. I think, although the sessions, from a learning perspective, the sessions weren't examinable in the traditional sense, but what they did do is tie together the information that students were learning elsewhere in their pathology classes and their CBL classes, in their readings, and it brought it into perspective and started to form a narrative about what they were learning. And in some ways, what was a pot in a pathology class, a specimen, all of a sudden had a life when it's brought into a woman's body, and it has a story behind it, and it has so many other layers. So I guess the key messages I feel that the students took away from the program were the not to miss symptoms and how they may masquerade as many other diagnoses. And also just the role of compassion and kindness and patience and understanding when they meet or care for a woman with ovarian cancer or their family. And these women may not know the vocabulary of medicine as we do, but they do know the caring touch of someone who can look them in the eye and sit down and listen and take time to just be with them. So there was a quote that one of our students left on a discussion forum, and it said, I had a friend lose her battle to cervical cancer at 28, and it was only discovered upon pregnancy, which she had to terminate early in an attempt to save her life. While her fight was with cervical cancer, not ovarian, it really is so enriching to hear about these women's disease, its progression, its effect on their life through their own words. I really appreciate these types of lectures and hope you keep presenting them. To me, they are invaluable. So there was that sentiment. The second year students that I teach, they've had their heads in books for 2 years. They're not quite on the ward seeing patients yet, and they can start to get a bit disenfranchised about why they've got into medicine. And to hear the patients speak and share their stories, it just reminds the students why they're here, and it's to do good and it's to help the patients. And I hope that this outcoming generation of doctors will be able to pick up the signs and symptoms of gynecological malignancies earlier and create a tangible benefit on survival. And if I might also just add, the personal impact on me through the program. I mentioned meeting Kristen Larson along with you, Helen and Jeanette, that back in 2018. And between the STS program in 2019 and 2020, I was informed of Kristen's passing. So she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer at 21, and she didn't quite make her 30th birthday. And she struck me as someone, a beautiful young woman, a passionate advocate for ovarian cancer who was very brave. And I hope that what you're all continuing to do honours young women like Kristen who fought so hard to get the message out there, and that translates into outcomes.
Thanks so much, Ashley, and thank you for those wonderful words about Kristen. The Survivors Teaching Students program was very important to Kristen to establish it in Australia, and we also would like to honour her memory as well. All of our volunteers are amazingly passionate and driven and people, and we thank each and every one of them. At the same time, as unfortunately as it happened, one of our other survivors, Jill Emberson, within 24 hours of each other, both Jill and Kristen sadly died. And over the long weekend, we've had the Queen's birthday holiday here in Australia, and Jill Emberson was named in the Queen's Birthday Honours List for her service to ovarian cancer, not just with Survivors Teaching Students, but in every which way that Jill possibly could to advocate for awareness and for funding for further research. Mark, I would just like to bring you in now, please. You sent us through some beautiful words about the impact of hearing the stories from our women in caregivers, and how you actually already have been able to bring that into your own practice.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. So my name is Mark, so I'm a final year medical student at Monash University, like Shiva. Thanks again to the ANZGOG panel for having me here today. I think it's a real privilege to have gone through the program, and an even bigger one to be able to speak about it as well. I think I was telling the panel about this when I first sort of was invited to speak. It was probably one of the most memorable experiences of my medical school, the whole thing. You know, after 5 years, that was one of the most memorable experiences I've still had. I think it was because the raw emotion was so palpable, honestly, like just through hearing the women speak. You could really get a sense for what they've really been through in their journey. I think I really resonate with what Ashley was saying before about her pathology example. I think medical school does a really great job of teaching us about the anatomy and the science behind ovarian cancer and other gynaecological malignancies, but we rarely get to put a story to the face. And I think that was the really crucial role that the STS really played in my education. I was able to put a story to the face of the women that I'd meet. I think medical school has this growing emphasis on transferring skills like empathy, compassion, and patient advocacy. So I think the STS program fits so well with sort of the direction that medical school is taking in growing us not only as university students, but as clinicians who, at the end, we care for people. So I think I really was able to appreciate this greater dimension of emotions, the journey that women would go through, and the way that it affects not only themselves, but their family, their friends. It just makes it so much more real, I think. And I think the timing of the program was really beneficial to me. So having this before we sort of were let loose onto the wards and we were able to meet these women in person, it was really great to go into, the gynae clinics and going into gynae surgeries with these women in the anaesthetic bay before they would go in. It just gave me this new dimension of understanding the weight of what they're about to go through. I still remember I was having this chat with a lady who was in the anaesthetic bay just before going in for her surgery. And we just sort of sat there, and I think I've never really felt the weight of what they were about to go through in the same way as it was in that experience. When you've been in theatre so many times, it just becomes so repetitive, but that was something completely different and surreal. And you know, she was starting to tear up when she was talking about what she went through, and so was I. And I think although it did sit heavier with me emotionally, I was really happy about that. I was really glad that I was able to really appreciate and empathize with what she was going through. And I think the program was a big reason for why I was able to do that. So I think, yeah, it's really allowed me to have this deeper and more meaningful conversation with women about their journey and you know, you know, sitting in silence when someone has been diagnosed with ovarian cancer. It happened a couple of times when I was in gynae clinic. That felt a lot more real than I think it would have otherwise. And just the value of just, you know, just having all of those thoughts going through my head about what they're about to encounter. It's quite heavy, I think, on anyone who has that understanding, but I'm glad that we have that understanding, I think. So I think it was also really inspiring to see the respect from my peers during the session. I've actually never seen a session, just a half an hour session where it was pure silence for the whole thing. No one said a word. We were all fixed on what those women were saying. I've never seen that before, I think. You know, during lectures, everyone's sort of just having a chat amongst themselves generally, but this was just, we really connected with that raw emotion. And after they left, we were still sort of left in silence. And I was really proud of my peers as well as myself to really have been through that. And I think, yeah, I can just see that it really did affect other people as well in the same way. And I think finally, I think it really hopefully will impact on me as a future clinician. I think being able to interact with this level of empathy and compassion that only comes through being able to identify with what someone is going through, even in some capacity, I think that's really crucial. I have sort of a deeper understanding of gynecological cancers beyond the science, beyond the anatomy. And I think it'll also help me as a patient advocate as well, through advocating for earlier screening and through the sort of public health domain as well. I think there are so many different ways that a program like this in such a short time can have such a dramatic impact on our future medical journey. So yeah, I just want to thank the women for allowing me and everyone else into this really special part of their lives. And yeah, it's a true privilege to have been part of this, and I really thank them for their time.
Thank you very much, Mark. And Mark, you spoke about the empathy, compassion and the patient advocacy. And Paul, I know that they're the aspects of the program that really touched you and why you were so passionate about the program being established in Australia and starting in WA as well. So I wonder, Paul, if you wouldn't mind speaking to your thoughts about survivors teaching students and having gone along and seen a session yourself, what your experience is.
Certainly. And just like to say thank you very much for the invitation to take part on the panel today. And also I'd like to thank Bronwyn for bringing the program to Australia, and you, Helen, and your team for leading it, because you do an amazing job, and also all of the volunteers that give their time and their passion to STS. So look, I've heard Helen speak about STS for almost 4 years at various ANZGOG meetings, and was very happy to introduce Helen to the University of Notre Dame Medical School in Fremantle in Western Australia, and delighted to go and attend the first survivors teaching students last September. And I just really to echo what Mark was saying, when I turned up at this 300 plus seater auditorium where the students graduate, my first thought was panic, because I thought, oh no, there's going to be a lot of background noise and people on mobile phones and chat. And as Mark said, there was total silence, and the audience were absolutely transfixed and engaged, and it had a very deep effect on me watching it in various ways. But I think what I would like to talk about just in the next couple of minutes is just how STS, or what my experience of STS in Fremantle last year links in with what I had heard from patients and families in clinical practice. Obviously, in clinical practice, we have a much shorter amount of time with patients and their families, but I would say one of the most common stories that we hear, and I'm not going to talk too long about this because you'll hear more about it in the second part of the program, but I would say an overwhelming majority of women experience a delay in getting their diagnosis, and that's very frustrating, understandably. And one of the overriding things I felt that STS has as a major benefit is that whatever students in these sessions are going to end up doing with their careers, many will go into general practice, but whatever they end up doing, I think that there's a very, very high likelihood they're never going to forget the STS session, and they will recall, and it's much, much easier, you know, experiential learning. There's no substitute for that. And I think as opposed to reading about a set of symptoms in a textbook, which you're very likely to forget once you've done your exam, this is something that you'll never forget. And obviously the hope is that when people recall the STS session and they're with a patient that's experiencing symptoms, they're going to remember and think about ovarian cancer as a possible diagnosis. And hopefully that will lead to earlier diagnosis for many patients. So that's really the first thing. The second thing I'd like to say is that obviously medicine is very much a science, but it's also an art. And I think one of the greatest skills a doctor can have, in fact, a life skill, is to be a good communicator. And to be a good communicator means being a good listener. And I think that attending an STS session, you actually experience that, and you learn that. And I think that's brought a wealth of benefit into my practice, actually. That as the partner in the video that we did hear that little bit was saying that, you know, doctors need to remember they're dealing with human beings and also dealing with families. And I think that's very, very important. We, you know, particularly, well, anytime you see a patient, but especially in the hard consultations where you might be breaking bad news or discussing treatment options, listening to people's concerns is a critical skill and ability. And I think the third thing that STS, well, the third thing for me is that as a researcher, it certainly generates research questions, and hopefully some of those will go on to clinical trials, and hopefully that will then improve outcomes for women and their families with ovarian cancer. And if we can inspire, I think actually it's probably the overriding word of the whole program, really. It's inspirational on so many levels, but if we can inspire more medical students to take up gynaecological oncology or to go into ovarian cancer research, then that has to be a superb thing.
Thank you very much, Paul. And as a member of our ANZGOG board, that's certainly one of the driving interest of ANZGOG, is we would need to encourage that next generation of gynae-oncologists and researchers to come through, and also to understand the importance of clinical research in improving outcomes for the future. So we're just coming to the end of this session, but I was just wondering if anybody had any further comments in closing that they'd like to make. And I also want to thank you all again, Ashley, Shiva, Mark and Paul, for taking the time to be with us tonight.
Thanks for having us.
And if you have got time, and if you were able to stay on for our discussion session, which we're going to be holding after the next panel, we'd really appreciate that too. So thank you very much, all of you. So next we're going to introduce our panel of our Survivors Teaching Students volunteers. Claire and Mark from Western Australia, Jane, who's from Melbourne, our regional coordinator. Claire is our regional coordinator in WA. Amanda, who is our Sydney regional coordinator, and Leslie, who is our regional coordinator for New South Wales country areas. And I'd also like to introduce Tony Lindsay, Tony's going to facilitate this panel with me. And Tony is the clinical psycho-oncologist at Lifehouse, and Tony helps us with the program and ensuring that all of our women and caregivers are working safely in the program. So Leslie and Tony, if you would also turn your cameras and your mics on to join us, I'd appreciate that. Thank you. So one of the things that I didn't speak to before is that in the Survivors Teaching Students program, there's a number of different roles. So all of the roles are volunteer roles, and we so appreciate the time that all of our volunteers give to the program. So once we establish a relationship with a university and a medical school, we then put in place a regional coordinator in that area. The regional coordinator then works directly with the university and liaises with me as well. The regional coordinator then starts to get together her team of volunteers around her. In each of the presentations, as the video said before, if you could make any sense of it coming and going as it did, which I apologise about, we have 3 presenters. And the reason that we have 3 presenters is that we want to show our students how different a disease ovarian cancer is, and that it can occur across age groups. And that's a really important message in itself. Ovarian cancer, like all cancers, is not just one disease, but it's many sorts of different types of ovarian cancer that can occur across age groups. Each of our presentations at the universities last for around about an hour. That's quite deliberate so that it fits nicely into the university's schedules and curriculums. And it's always facilitated. And our facilitators can be the regional coordinator, and each of our regional coordinators here today have both facilitated a presentation as well as being a regional coordinator. And the regional coordinators can also present their story as well if need be. So I would just like to thank you all for joining today. And Tony, would you like to unmute your mic and turn your camera on if you can?
I can certainly turn my mic on, but my camera is having a tantrum. So I apologise. You don't get to see my smiling face today.
No, well, we're sorry about that, Tony, but I'm glad that you're here with us. So, yes, so Claire and Mark, I'd just like you, if you wouldn't mind talking about your experience as regional coordinator, and Mark, you as presenting your story as a caregiver. And it's the caregiver's story is a really important part of our Survivors Teaching Students program. And as Ashley and Mark, Shiva and Paul mentioned, how the caregiver story really emphasises the importance that ovarian cancer affects the whole family and not just the woman who's diagnosed with it.
Thank you for the invitation to speak, firstly. I find with the STS programme, I can give a different insight into as being a carer. Normally, it's the woman who's been diagnosed with the ovarian cancer that they hear from. I can tell them how the carer is affected by their partner's diagnosis. I couldn't speak to my wife about how I was feeling as she was trying to deal with a terminal cancer diagnosis while I was falling apart inside. I found that really difficult to speak to her. That's why speaking to the medical students at Notre Dame, I felt I really connected with them. They normally hear from the women with the cancer diagnosis, but to hear my story as a caregiver gave them the opportunity to see how it affects the family and also the carer of the patient who's been through the cancer treatment. Just being able to talk about it, how I felt, has helped with my mental health, which I was struggling with. I'm still having bad days, I have good days, but being part of the STS helps me share my feelings and my emotions that are part of being a carer for my wife. I think when you have medical students in tears listening to your story, you know they won't forget it, and hopefully they take that into their medical careers. So I mean, that to me, that is one of the great things about being part of the STS programme. It's given my side of the story so we get to know how the carer feels as well.
And I think that worked really well as a coordinator and the facilitator. We found that that worked really well. The audience were certainly engaged with the carer's story, perhaps not expecting the carer's story. So that worked well for us. And as Professor Cohen had said, you could hear a pin drop in an audience of 300 medical students. It's fantastic. And for me, what I gained from it, I just find it incredibly rewarding that we go along there, speak to these students, allow us to speak to them, and they listen. And for us as patients, as ovarian cancer patients, we do this, the reason we do that, I expect most of us do this, is so that the future doctors and nurses have a better understanding of the symptoms and the risks for women with ovarian cancer. And from our little group in Western Australia, our speakers will have been very different stories, but the main thing that pulls all together, and again, Professor Cohen had already picked up on that, is that we were all, for our little group of ladies, between 8 and 10 months before we get referred to a specialist. So for me to speak to these students and them to hear the story and hopefully remember, and clearly they will remember the stories, that they will then be able to refer on to a specialist at an earlier stage and save lives. And that's why we do it. It's hugely rewarding for us to do this. And we learn as a couple, we learn so much about each other's story that we didn't ever converse with each other. And so I had no idea what Mark was going through. And while Mark was in tears telling his story, and the students were in tears listening to his story, I was in tears because it was the first time I heard his story. So it helped us as a couple as well. So yeah, thank you for organising this and setting it up, because from our experience, what we've seen is it's working very well with the students and hopefully save lives.
Thanks very much, Claire and Mark. And Tony, would you like to ask Claire and Mark anything about the program, and particularly the role of regional coordinator, perhaps, and working together? You talked about, you know, the first time that you shared your story with each other was the first time that you'd actually heard that. And that's not an unusual story amongst our volunteers as well.
No, definitely. And the thing, I guess, that struck me in that is that kind of naively, I guess I assumed that you guys might have shared that before you went, to then kind of find that wasn't the case. And I guess I wonder, for getting your sense of, because it sounds like doing that process was a really helpful and cathartic piece, were there pieces that you, as Helen and I have often spoken about, the challenge of making sure that people feel comfortable in what they're sharing? Did you guys were you cognizant of what that conversation would look like knowing the other person was in the room?
I don't think we thought about it, because we probably thought we knew everything about each other.
Mm.
Yeah.
And we didn't, clearly didn't.
And I thought Claire was going through enough. I didn't want to burden her with my problems the way I was feeling.
Mm.
She was dealing with a terminal cancer diagnosis. And yeah, I thought, well, I can't tell my wife how I'm feeling, because she's dealing enough with what she's going through. So yeah, I don't think it really dawned on us, really.
Maybe as being the cancer patient, and I've heard other ladies say this, you can become quite selfish because it's all about you. You know, everyone asks about you, the doctor appointments are all about you, everything is about you. So you don't actually actually think too much about the other person.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm not intentionally selfish, but you can be selfish, and it taught me to stop being selfish. That what Mark was going through was real.
It probably took me about 6 months before somebody actually asked me how I was doing. And I've heard that quite a lot, that it takes a while. But I mean, in my eyes, Claire was a priority. That was a priority, was to get her through the initial stages of treatment. Oh yeah.
And as a regional coordinator, getting together with all the other ladies who are going through similar situations, it was just amazing to see how much all us ladies and 2 gentlemen just really bonded through it all. Because although we were, and I think it was either Mark or Shiva who mentioned, we were all from different backgrounds, we're all completely different people, different cultures, different everything, but we just bonded with our stories immediately. So we have, it's probably like almost like another support group for us, working and doing this.
No, definitely. It sounds like it's been both for you guys, but also for the people who kind of engage with the program. This is, this is kind of speaking to all of those fundamental pieces around why this is helpful, right?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks, Mark and Claire and Tony. And Jane, you've been involved with Survivors teaching students since very early, as the first place that we expanded to after Sydney was Melbourne. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about your experiences as regional coordinator, facilitator and presenter, because you can speak to all of the roles across the program.
Thanks, Helen. Yes, it took a little bit of time for us to get some volunteers in Victoria, but now we have 14. So, and they go from obviously around the areas close to Melbourne, but also up to near Echuca. There's some down near Frankston, so they're from all over. So yes, I was very excited to hear about the program. I first heard Bronwyn speak at a forum, and I thought, this is for me. I really want to be involved. So as soon as I heard, I emailed Helen and I said, when can I join? And yes, so we've been able to, like Claire said, our team is quite a diverse group. We're from different backgrounds, but we have that story that brings us together, even though our stories are very individual. We've received that life-changing diagnosis of ovarian cancer, but some of us may have been diagnosed early stage, which is quite rare, but most of them are late stage. I've lost some really close friends in the short term that I have been involved, and that is really hard, to see them become so unwell, and you travel that journey while a little bit on the outside. You are there as well with them. Also, the different ages in my team. I have somebody that was diagnosed at 21, like Kristen, and Kristen was a friend too, and another one at 24. And then, of course, we go up to a lady who has just turned 70. So we have a very, very broad range. And it's really good when we actually go into the universities and the hospitals when we actually present, because we have that diversity too. So I think that the students and the nurses, they actually find that really interesting to hear how different that we are. And of course, it's really difficult as well when we have the women who have young children and their uncertain journeys as well. So again, it's just, but at the same time, it is absolute privilege to be involved in the program. I am involved in a few other consumer activities, but this is really something that is extremely high up there. We get such a pleasure out of being able to share a very raw part of our lives.
Thank you, Jane. And Amanda, you're the Regional Coordinator in Sydney and you're fairly new to the program. And I just wanted to ask you if you wouldn't mind talking to your experiences and what it's meant for you and what it's like for you working in survivors teaching students, and also taking on that role of Regional Coordinator, and perhaps a little bit of what's involved in the Regional Coordinator's role. And for all of those who are listening, as you saw when I was talking about survivors teaching students before, we have programs all around Australia, and we're always interested in hearing from people who may be interested in joining the program as a volunteer in any of the roles, and particularly in the regional and rural areas, as we're presenting in both metropolitan, regional and rural areas. So Amanda, yes, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about your experience, thank you.
Hi, yeah, I am really new and I just got thrown in the deep end. I only finished I got diagnosed only the year before last and finished chemo in March last year. So this is my second haircut for all you guys out there who know what I'm talking about. Very exciting. And yeah, it was new. I got thrown straight into being a facilitator, and but really wanted to be a part of survivors teaching students. Kristen Young, who is attending today, found me at a support group in Sydney and said, would you like to join survivors teaching students? As soon as she told me about it, I just went, yep, how do I do it? Where do I sign? How can I get involved? Because I really felt that patient advocacy was just so important. And yeah, and so to be a regional coordinator has been interesting. It's been quite a steep learning curve. Sydney's quite big and we have a lot of things going on here. I've got a co-coordinator, Denise, and together we're still trying to work out how to share the role, but we're getting there. And because COVID has been here, I haven't, and I only became the regional coordinator this year and really only kicked in during COVID. I can't claim like Claire and Jane to know the people who I'm working with that well, to be quite honest with you. And listening to both of you makes me want to reach out and have a little Zoom meeting with all the people that I'm working with and get to know them a little bit better, because I don't know them as well as I would like to. And on my first facilitation, I just wanted to say quickly that, it was very personal for me. The first time I facilitated, a girlfriend of mine, I'd just been to a funeral that day and it was someone that I knew who had ovarian cancer. And so it was very meaningful to me. And so the whole journey has been really meaningful. And I'm very, very, very grateful that I'm part of Survivors Teaching Students.
Thanks, Amanda. And we really appreciate you putting your hand up. And it does feel a little bit like being thrown in the deep end, but we work with all of our volunteers to make sure that we actually help with that process a little bit more. And each region is very different. And I'm going to speak to Leslie in a moment because she looks after people across regional and rural New South Wales. And I think that that's one of the strengths of the program, is that each region has really its own very different flavour. And Sydney is particularly, it's our biggest program, and it was where we first developed the program. We've got the largest number of volunteers, and that's one of the reasons why we have 2 regional coordinators in Sydney. And also an important part of working in the program is that it's only as it works for you. So, this is one of the reasons, why even the program's been going, we're going now in our 3rd year, moving into our 4th year. And all of the roles are voluntary, and all of our volunteers are welcome to step in and out of the role as it suits them in whatever happens in life. And that's why we've had a turnover in regional coordinators in Sydney. And we really appreciate the work that you're doing, Amanda, and Denise as well, helping you. And Tony, so if you have anything to add here, that would be great. And then Leslie, I'm going to come across to you and ask you to speak about, you're coming from a different perspective to working in the program, but Tony, if you could just come in here now.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I guess the thing that struck me as you were speaking, Amanda, is the kind of, I can imagine people might have had one of two responses to that kind of process of coming into the program, one of which might have been overwhelm and running in the other direction. What's kind of kept you connected and engaged? Like you said, there's been some really, really important moments and things, but I guess for people that might be listening out thinking, oh yeah, I'm interested in doing this, what's the piece that's kind of gone, you know what, this has been a pretty kind of speedy learning curve, but it's a curve that's been really helpful and worth it?
I think listening to people like Shiva and Mark make it worthwhile, and hearing their feedback. That's what it's all about for me. Is that if the medical professionals, nurses and doctors and naturopaths and everyone could understand our perspective and what it feels like to be a patient, if I can help them and our teams can help them to understand that and have empathy for us, and I think that we're achieving our goal.
Definitely. And it sounds like you're in to stay.
I think so. Let's see how it goes. Sounds like it. Feels like it.
Awesome. That's good. Thanks, Helen.
Thanks, Tony, and thanks, Amanda. And Leslie. So Leslie is our regional coordinator who looks after the programs across New South Wales outside of the metropolitan area. And Leslie, if you could just tell us a little bit about your story, and that you bring a different perspective, and the work that you do with your teams. I might add that coronavirus has brought challenges to all of us, but also it has enabled us to run our program across Australia using Zoom. We are presenting to the students through Zoom, and we have not paused at all, thanks to the resilience of all of you, our volunteers, and thank you to you as well. But we've only had we have had no cancellations of any of our presentations, and we've only had one postponed that we're going to be doing shortly. So we've actually been able to continue with our presentations, and through Zoom we've actually been able to bring our regional and rural women together to meet more of our people in the metropolitan areas. So Leslie, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Helen, and thank you for the opportunity to speak at this webinar today. Before I start that, I actually had an endometrial cancer. The tumours were rare, the prognosis wasn't very good. In 2006, I was involved with an organisation where, although I knew about women getting ovarian cancer, I actually didn't understand the depth of the poor prognosis, late diagnosis. So, having always been an advocate for women, I actually tunnelled a lot of my energy into working toward women with ovarian cancer and the other gynaecological cancers. When STS came to Australia, Helen and I had met because we knew each other beforehand. She talked to me a bit more about it, and look, it was just an easy decision to take on the role as a regional coordinator because I have been lucky. I feel that what I can do as a regional coordinator and a facilitator is assist my presenters in spreading the word to the students at the universities. It's quite humbling in some ways when you have this captive audience because we're telling the story that isn't actually in the textbook. So as Helen said, I manage regional and rural New South Wales. It's really good because most of the speakers come from the country, and the students often don't realise that when women are diagnosed that live out of the city, there's a huge upheaval. There's the emotional upheaval of dealing with the disease, having to come to Sydney. It's very different from women just living in the city. There's financial implications, accommodation implications. And that gives the students, when they hear the women talking in the country, how different it can be. So I really find it to be an honour and a privilege to be a part of this program and to support women and hopefully save the lives of many women. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you very much, Leslie, and thank you all. Tony, I'd just like to bring you in here too. If you could, have you got some questions or some thoughts that you'd like to share with the panel or ask the panel?
Yeah, I guess one of the things that I'm conscious that there might be some people listening in who are kind of teetering on the fence of whether this is the thing that they should do or not. And I guess I'm interested, I know Helen and I have spoken a lot over the years about thinking about, you know, people having a sense of what some of the difficult parts of their story might be and their reluctance perhaps to share those parts. And I guess I just wanted to get some thoughts from all of you guys around what's that experience been like navigating and making those decisions about what do you share and what don't you share?
I would just like to say that as far as that goes, it's whatever the individual feels comfortable with. It is extremely raw, as I mentioned before, and certainly within our training, we explain to our team members that they need to feel comfortable in whatever they share. And sometimes a presenter may get upset because it is very emotional, but it's up to them if they would like to go there or not, or take a breath and just, you know, wait to move on. And some have changed that part of their story because they find it a little bit, they get stuck on it. So, you know, as a regional coordinator, I work with my team one-on-one with their stories, and until they sort of feel comfortable with what they have written down, and then they can practice with me, and then we encourage them to practice with their family, because it's like Mark and Claire said, either of them, they hadn't sort of done that with each other, and I did that with my husband and daughter too, and they were, you know, like quite surprised too. They just said, oh my goodness, I didn't realise that that's what it was like for you, because yeah, you just tend to not go there. So yeah, I think it's whatever you feel comfortable with.
Can I just say, from a carer's point of view, I think definitely speaking about it helps, because I had my head buried in the sand, and when you actually get up there and tell your story and see the reaction that you get, it definitely helps talking about it. And I would definitely say any carers out there who are thinking about it, do it, because it helped me immensely, and I think it helped us as a couple as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess it's kind of to reinforce what Helen mentioned earlier, I guess my observations of the program is that there's kind of layers and layers and layers of support around how, you know, how people both present their experience, but also how they debrief around their experience, and, you know, different times for different people feel better or worse, and managing those things. And so, you know, one of the really important jobs from my sense, for both from that regional coordinator perspective, but also kind of that, I guess, kind of peer support that a few people have mentioned, is that actually that's a really helpful piece in kind of shaping that experience for people.
I just wanted to say something. I also feel that another really important part is being heard. And I'm not married and don't have any children, and didn't really have the support around me, and I didn't really have anyone to talk to about it, because a lot of my friends were not really that interested, or, well, I don't know, it was difficult to discuss what was going on with me with my friends sometimes. And having to write my story and then present it was really quite cathartic and liberating for me, and to know that my story was going to be of value to others was actually really great.
Yeah, definitely. And it sounds like for all of you, just putting language to many of these things has been really helpful, hasn't it? Definitely. All right, I'll hand over to Helen.
Helen, we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Broke my own golden rule, turned my microphone on. Thank you all very much for joining us. And if you could stay with us, and if Paul and Ashley and Mark and Shiva could turn their cameras back on again as well. And for all of those listening, if you'd like to post any questions that you would like asked in the Q&A, we'll be able to work through those as well. So while we're waiting for any questions to come through, this is an opportunity for you all actually to speak to each other. And so if you have any thoughts or questions, and Bronwyn, thank you also for joining us, that you would like to pose, this is an opportunity now.
Can I ask a question to Leslie?
Yes.
Can you talk to us, and probably Jane as well, but can you talk to us a little bit about some of the regional and rural women, how important it is for them to actually be involved in this program?
I have found from my experience after doing this for a couple of years that it's really important. I feel that is really important for the women. They are very happy to talk to the students, and as I said when I was speaking, that to give that country perspective is very important, because, you know, a woman in the country is often referred down to Sydney, and if we have a medical student that one day meets a woman with an ovarian cancer who's come from the country, who is quite distressed, not so much for the cancer, but more for the financial aspect and the emotional separation from family, it gives them some insight.
I would agree with what Leslie just said. We have two women that are from the country area in our Melbourne team, as I think I mentioned before, one from up near Echuca and one from down near Warrnambool. And they both have had to travel to Melbourne for their treatment, both their surgery and their chemotherapy. And for actually one of the ladies, she actually has been coming back for reoccurrences. She's had additional surgery, and she's brachia, so she's also gone through that genetic testing and having surgery from that perspective. And I know the lady from Warrnambool, she just has shared how it's not just the fact that she's the expense in that, but she's really appreciative of being involved because she feels so alone, just so far away. It's not a disease that you that many women are diagnosed with, as opposed to, say, a breast cancer. And she really appreciated having peers to speak with as well. But certainly the financial and the travel and the family pressures of having to come so far, it is quite different for them.
Thank you, Jane and Leslie. We've had a question come in from one of our viewers. So one of our facilitators, Kristen, is watching on, and Kristen has said that as a facilitator, she has found working with new presenters to develop their stories both challenging and extremely satisfying. And she was wondering if you, the panel, could please talk about the process of preparing the story for Survivors Teaching students.
I can go again if you like. Sorry,
yes,
I don't
go
mean
ahead.
to be.
All right, go ahead, Jane.
Actually, OCRF in the US have an excellent guide. So they've got like the dot points where you can sort of just start to put it out on paper. And then, as I mentioned before, I'll actually work one-on-one with our presenter and actually just say, just get it out. And if you can get it down to about 1,500 words, that would be super. If not, just send it to me and I'll start to have a look at it and from an outsider perspective. And then we gradually get it to between 1,000 and 1,500 words to be able to deliver that in the 7 to 10 minutes that they have in their presentation. And then what I usually would do would be, we can actually have a practice, as I said before, between us, particularly whilst we're using Zoom, so that's actually quite good, but also to share with their family or their friends, that's actually really good too. But then I'll invite them, if we're doing a live session, I'll actually invite them to a presentation at the university where they can actually watch, and they can also be involved in our discussion time. But I've also done that with Zoom as well. I've actually asked them to come on as an observer, and that actually is extremely helpful as well.
It's Leslie here. Actually, Jane and I have talked about this. We've actually observed Zoom's actually been, I don't know how a quantum leap, I suppose, for confidence for the women. They can come in, they can observe, they can present, but they're actually in their own home, which has made it a lot easier for the women. They've got somebody there, they're in their comfort zone. So I think as we move forward into the future post-COVID, I personally would hate to let go completely of Zoom.
Yes, Zoom has certainly opened up the possibilities for our regional and rural women to be included. And, you know, one of the examples is we have a volunteer who lives 5 hours northwest of Townsville. So that's quite remote. And through Zoom, she's been able to participate in more presentations than if she had to drive down to Townsville to give a presentation. And it's been very important for her. And as a woman who lives quite remotely, she's really been able to speak to the students about what it's like to live remotely and and first to achieve a diagnosis and then manage going through treatment and the importance of telehealth, which has really helped her with that. So Zoom has certainly opened up the program for us. And I think going forward, as you said, Leslie, there'll be a combination of both. We had a question come through asking, was the program only for women with ovarian cancer? certainly with our agreement with the Ovarian Cancer Research Alliance in the US, who licenses us to run the program in Australia, whilst our emphasis is on ovarian cancer, at ANZGOG, we're an organisation that looks after all gynae cancers, and yes, the program is open to women who have other gynecological cancers. So if you are interested, there'll be some information at the end of the webinar where you can get in touch. I also wanted to speak to, and Bronwyn, you can come in on this discussion as well, about telling your story. So everybody's story is very personal and their own, and we never tell you how to tell your story. In sharing your story, we always talk to you about the audience, whether it's going to be medical students or nursing students, allied health, sometimes it's medical science students, sometimes it's researchers and bench scientists. But we just ask you to think about your story and think about the things in your story that you would like to bring forward, so that those students can take those learnings through to their own practice. And if women and caregivers are often concerned about the difficult parts of their story and becoming emotional while telling their stories. And the important thing is that you need only tell the parts of your story that you're comfortable with. That's the first thing. So if there's parts of your story that are too difficult or too raw to speak to, you don't have to go there. There's lots in your stories, each of your personal stories, that are of value for the students to hear. The second thing is, and I think that Shiva, Paul, Ashley and Mark, from your own experience, you can speak to this as well. Learning to sit with emotion is a very important part of your practice. And so seeing that with the women and caregivers is a learning in itself. We make sure, as Tony said in the program, that you feel safe working in the program. So in our training together, we talk a lot about this, and we talk about techniques for managing it. And importantly, after you've given your presentation, we always ask each of our presenters to have half an hour available where we debrief together and make sure that you're all back in the present now and back in a place where you can continue to resume your daily life. So perhaps, speaking to the importance of being able to sit with and hold emotion as practitioners is something that I invite you to speak to, either Ashley, Paul, Shiva or Mark.
Helen, if there's one thing that I could add as an observation, every story is told differently and every story is different. The ones that tend to empower and uplift the students are the ones that have a positive message framed within the story. It doesn't matter, all stories are filled with really tough, raw facts and experiences, but to leave the students with something that they can take away, that they want to do better, a take-home message that makes them want to do better and be better, are the ones that I find the most uplifting. And I suppose that requires you all as survivors with ovarian cancer to have processed a lot of your own journey and to have some level of that reflection and insight where you can provide that sort of take-home message to the students about what would have made your journey that little bit better. What were the special things that people did? What do they want to emulate and be like? I find that those stories, and I've sat through 6 different stories so far, they've been the ones that have stuck with me the most.
I think also, Helen, the story can change. So when you're starting, there certain themes might be really important to you, and you want a certain part of your story to be the highlight to get that message, and each of us will have a different angle. It'll be different for younger, older, people who are rural versus located right near a main hospital. But over time, it also can change. What you want to be your key message will differ, and your ability to live through that emotion will change. Also, depending on where you are in your follow-up care. If you have a session the week after you've just had a follow-up, you might find different aspects of your story emotionally difficult, or if you're waiting for a result to come back, you might not be able to handle different elements of the story. So the story does evolve or change over time. And one of the parts of the training program is for you and your facilitator to work with you and make sure what that key message is that you want to speak to, and ensure that that actual message comes across and you don't get stuck in an emotional aspect that's not even relevant to your key story that you want to come across. And that's about getting you prepared and ready and practicing and ensuring that you're able to highlight and skim over the areas that are less important to your message and move through that emotion without it becoming robotic, because you have to have and own that emotional impact of your story for them to be able to deliver it and be well received.
Can't hear you, Helen.
Thanks, Bronwyn. A question has come through for Mark and Shiva. You both were at a live presentation, a face-to-face presentation, and one of our viewers was wondering, do you think that in the Zoom environment it's less powerful or as powerful?
I think with what I've actually come to appreciate because of coronavirus and with Zoom is the impact of a face-to-face interaction, and how much I've missed actually being able to see someone and see them in person and speak to them. I think both of them have sort of different impacts, because as someone was mentioning before, when you have a way in which you can engage with someone rurally who might have had to then put in a lot more effort to come along to a session, I think you get a wider range of experiences and a diversity of experience that I might not have otherwise gotten if they were unable to make a session because they were far away. But in saying that, I think what particularly Mark spoke about in the silence of the room, where usually you'd have everybody typing voraciously with every slide. I actually remember particularly one occasion where the presentation had started and I think one person had their laptop sort of half open and was maybe typing an email, and someone actually got up and told them to close their laptop because it was so disrespectful. And having that kind of shared experience with my peers and being able to see the women in person, I think it's a different impact. I don't think it's a lessened impact.
Thanks very much, Shiva. Yeah, we've fast running out of time, so I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank all of our panellists for joining us this evening for the webinar, and for all of our viewers for taking the time to come along and listen. The session is being recorded and it will be available on our website, which is the ANZGOG website on the Survivors Teaching Students page. And when we finish the webinar, you'll be sent a short survey, just 3 questions. If you wouldn't mind taking the time to answer those 3 questions, we would really appreciate that. And I just want to thank everybody who's been involved in helping us get this webinar together today, and have taken the time to come along very much. We really appreciate it. And I just want to finish by saying that ANZGOG and our board, we're all very proud of everything that you're doing in the Survivors Teaching Students program, and we're very proud to be running the program in Australia. We're grateful for the support of Cancer Australia to help establish the program, and we plan to be continuing it on. So thank you very much, everybody, and I'll say good night to you all.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No.
Bye-bye.